Okay, Hatchet chapter 11. The first word is comprised. Comprised means to be composed of, like comprised of, like a lemonade is comprised of lemons, sugar, and water. So it's what it's made of. And banked means to build up. So we're going to look here, what did it mean by it was a mental thing when talking about cleaning up the camp? So he said this analogy, it was a mental thing. What did he mean by that? Number 2, when Brian saw the reflection of himself in the water, he saw how much he had physically changed. But he thought more so than his body, there was a change in his mind. What did he mean? Okay, so when Brian saw his reflection, he saw that his face and his body had changed. But he said that his mind also changed. How did his mind change? What realization or what did Brian come to when he was up on the bluff looking for an area to signal fire? So what did he come to the realization of? What did he, almost the conclusion, what did he say or decide? And 4, what plan did Brian make to catch fish? Do you think it'll work? You gotta tell me why. Okay, and then here's our vocab words. What do you think it means and what the definition is right from the slides. Okay, so we have chapter 11. Okay, there were things to do. Okay, so actually before we get started, let's think about what happened the last time Brian was, that's right, Brian made a fire. He was making a fire and he also found something. He was sleeping and something had woke him up. It was a turtle. A turtle had woken him up. And he found something in the sand near his cave or his alcove. That's right, he found turtle eggs and he ate them. He ate them raw. So right now he is outside, kind of looking at the eggs. I believe he talked about hoping that somebody could come and save him. Yep. Alright, so Brian just kind of made a new discovery in the last chapter. Let's see what happens. There were these things to do. He transferred all the eggs from the small beach into the shelter, reburying them near his sleeping area. It took all of his will to keep from eating another one as he moved them, but he got it done, and when they were out of sight again, it was easier. He added wood to the fire and cleaned up the camp area. A good laugh, that, cleaning the camp. All he did was shake out his windbreaker and hang it in the sun to dry the berry juice that had soaked in, and smooth the sand where he slept. But it was a mental thing. Oh, a mental thing. He had gotten depressed, thinking about how they hadn't found him yet, and when he was busy and had something to do, the depression seemed to leave. So even though he saw himself and he was feeling depressed, probably sad, and probably losing hope, he found things to keep him busy to help his mood and keep him happier. So there were things to do. With the camp squared away, he brought in more wood. He had decided to always have enough on hand for 3 days, and after spending one night with the fire for a friend, he knew what staggering amount of wood it would take. He worked all the way through the morning at the wood, breaking it down from the limbs and breaking or chopping them into smaller pieces, storing them neatly beneath the overhang. He stopped once to take a drink at the lake, and as in reflection, he saw that the swelling of his head was nearly gone. There was no pain, so he assumed that it had taken care of itself. His leg was also back to normal, although he had a small pattern of holes, roughly star-shaped, where the quills had nailed him, while he was standing there at the lake shore, taking shock, he noticed that his body was changing. So here it talks about, this is really good imagery. You can see how he's actually looking after being on the island for so long and not really eating normally. He had never been fat, but he had been slightly heavy with a little extra weight just above his belt at the sides. This was completely gone, and his stomach had caved into the hunger, and the sun had cooked them past burning. So he was tanning, and with the smoke from the fire, his face was starting to look like leather. But perhaps more than his body was the change in his mind, or the way he was becoming. I am not the same, he thought. I see, I hear differently. He did not know when the change started, but it was there. When a sound came to him now, he didn't just hear it, but he knew the sound. He would swing and look at it, a breaking twig, a movement of air, and know the sound as if he somehow could move his mind back down the wave of sound to the source. So his senses, his hearing senses, were getting better. He could know that the sound was before he quite realized that he had heard it. And when he saw something, a bird moving a wing inside a bush or a ripple of the water, he would truly see that thing, not just notice it as he used to notice things in the city. He would see all the parts of it, see the whole wing, the feathers, see the color of the feathers, see the bush, and the size and shape of the color of its leaves. He would see the way the light moved with the ripples of the water, and he would see that the wind made the ripples, and which way that wind had to blow to make the ripples move in a certain way. So Brian's noticing all of these little things going on now. He's more or less cherishing the world around him. He's saying that he can see the whole bird, the feathers, the colors. He can see the bush, the size and shape, the color of the leaves. He's really cherishing the world around him now because he really doesn't have much, so he really wants to cherish what he has. None of that used to be in Brian, and now it was a part of him, a changed part of him, a grown part of him. And the two things, his mind and body, had come together as well and made a connection with each other that he didn't quite understand. When his ears heard a sound or his eyes saw a sight in his mind, took control of his body. Without his thinking, he moved to face the sound or sight, moved to make ready for it, to deal with it. There were things to do. When the wood was done, he decided to get a signal fire ready. He moved to the top of the rock ridge that composed of the bluff, okay, this is part of a question, the bluff over a shelter. The bluff sounds like an overhang of the shelter, and was pleased to find a large, flat stone area. More wood, he thought, moaning inwardly. He went back to the fallen trees and found more dead limbs, carrying them up on the rock until he had enough for a fire. Initially, he had thought of making a signal fire every day, but he couldn't. He would never be able to keep the wood supply going. So, while he was working, he decided to have the fire ready, and if he heard an engine, or even thought he heard a plane engine, he would run up with the burning limb and set off the signal fire. Okay, so Brian's thinking now. He's thinking strategically. I cannot keep a fire going, so this is what I can do. I can use my senses. I'm really good at hearing. I'm going to listen, and if I hear an engine, I'm going to go start the signal fire so it has a lot of smoke so they see me. Things to do. At the last trip to the top of the stone bluff with wood, he stopped, sat on the point overlooking the lake, and rested. The lake lay before him, 20 or so feet below, and he had not seen its way since it came up from the plain. Remembering the crash, he had a moment of fear, a breath-tightening little ripple of terror, but it passed, and he was quickly caught up in the beauty of the scenery. It was so incredibly beautiful that it was almost unreal. From his height, he could not see just the lake, but across part of the forest, a green carpet, and it was full of life. Birds, insects. There was a constant hum and song. All at the other end of the bottom of the L, there was another large rock sticking out over the water, and on top of the rock, a snaggly pine had somehow found food and grown, bent and gnarled. Sitting on one limb was a bluebird, with a crest and a sharp beak, a kingfisher. He thought of a picture he had seen once, which left the branch while he was watched and dove into the water. It emerged a split second later. Its mouth was in its mouth was a small fish, wiggling silver in the sun. It took the fish to a limb, jiggled it twice, and swallowed it whole. Fish. So he was sitting there, just overlooking the whole lake, and he saw something that really caught his eye. He saw a bird, and the bird caught a fish, and it gave him an idea. Fish. Of course, he thought there were fish in the lake and they were food, and if a bird could do it. He scrambled down to the side of the bluff and trod at the edge of the lake, looking down into the water. Somehow, it had never occurred to him to look inside the water, only at the surface. The sun was flashing back up into his eyes, and he moved off to the side, and he took his shoes off and waded out 15 feet. Then he turned and stood still, with the sun at his back, and studied the water again. It was, he saw after a moment, literally packed with life. Small fish swam everywhere, some narrow and long, some round, most of them 3 or 4 inches long, some a bit larger and many smaller. There was a patch of mud off to the side, leading into deep water, and he could only see old clam shells there, so there must be clams. As he watched, a crayfish, looking like a tiny lobster, left one of the empty clam shells and went to another looking for something to eat, digging with its claws. So Brian right now is standing in the water, and he is standing so still that he can see through the water and see all of this sea life almost. He's watching the crayfish, he sees fish, he saw clams, he's seeing all these things that he could actually eat. While he stood, some of the small, roundish fish came quite close to his legs, and he got tensed, got ready, and made a wild stab at grabbing one of them. They exploded away in 100 flicks of quick light, so fast that he had no hope of catching them that way. But they soon came back, seemed to be curious about him, and as he walked from the water, he tried to think of a way to use that curiosity to catch him. This is a question about, I believe it's about how he catches the fish. So let's see what other idea he comes up with. He had no hooks or strings, but if he could somehow lower them into the shallows and make a spear, a small fish spear, he might be able to strike fast enough to get one. He would have to find the right kind of wood, slim and straight. He had seen some willows up along the lake that might work, and he could use the hatchet to sharpen it and shape it while it was sitting by the fire tonight. And that brought up the fire, which he had to feed again. He looked at the sun and saw it was getting late in the afternoon, and when he thought of how late it was, he thought that he ought to reward all his hard work with another egg, and that made him think of some kind of dessert would be nice. He smiled when he thought of dessert, so fancy. That's funny. And he wondered if he should move up the lake and see if he could find some raspberries after he banked the fire. And while he was looking for the right wood for a spear wood, he thought, and it all rolled together, just rolled together and rolled over him. There were things to do.